Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two and devoted homemaker. Join me on this journey as we explore the beauty of slow and simple living, where life unfolds at its own unhurried pace. I'll take you through my experiences of slowing down, tending to our allotment plot, finding joy in the little things and making the most of our small home. Together we'll learn to live in harmony with the ever-changing seasons, discovering the magic that lies in embracing the present moment. So let's embark on this enriching adventure towards a more intentional and fulfilling life. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, and today I have a really exciting interview with Toni. Now, Toni home educates just like me, and she actually educates some slightly older children. And so we often hear from people who are right at the beginning of their home education journey, you know, in those either early years or those first, what would be school years. And, you know, sometimes it's ace to hear from other people who are a little further along on that journey and what home educating teens and preteens can be like. So let's dive into it. Let's dive into the episode with Toni. Hi, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'm Toni and I'm a mum of two. I live at home with my husband and my dog and my two cats. I'm a business owner and I'm a full-time home educator.
Excellent. So today we're going to talk about home education, but we're also going to talk about home educating older children. So often on this podcast, I talk to people and we're talking about like home ed in like the early years or, you know, primary kids. So let's start at the beginning. What made you decide to home educate in the first place?
So I think the first thing is I haven't always home ed. So the boys went to school, they went to preschool, and then naturally we were in a small village and I kind of got swept along the way, and it was like, okay, we're going to go to school, and just followed along. But my background is early years. I did a foundation degree in early years, so I knew all the philosophies, all the different education, and I really wanted to home ed. And we had decided, sort of myself and my husband, we would do that from secondary. Then COVID hit and kind of just threw us into it. So yeah, we are one of the COVID homeschoolers. But I think what people sort of get really misconception really, because what happened in COVID was crisis schooling.
Yeah.
That's so not homeschooling. It's so different. And I just loved having the boys at home. I loved teaching them. I just generally enjoyed their company. And we were like, right, let's just do this, because we weren't ready for them to go back when everyone had to kind of decided, well, the government had decided it was safe. And we were like, I don't know. So it was either we deregister and take this path, or they're going back before we're ready. And we just kind of went, yeah, let's do it. And I sent the email, and I was really fortunate. I got really good response back from the school, really supportive, happy to see us sort of go on our way, and offered help if we needed it. So yeah, and then now 4 years on, we're still home edding.
Fantastic. Yeah, the same as you. Like, obviously my kids were well, one of them wasn't even born at the beginning of the COVID, but my daughter was, and like observing like the narrative around what was going on during COVID and education was like, it did set my jaw on edge a little bit sometimes, and people were like, oh, homeschooling, and I still see it now. I saw the other day somebody talking about like, oh, I could never homeschool because I had to homeschool during COVID, and I was like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
Did not.
Exactly.
It was nothing like it. And you know, even people who already like home educated before COVID, like their whole structure was thrown off by COVID as well, because like no classes, no get-togethers and stuff. So it's like it was like a period of time where it was just like an emergency.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did set my jaw on edge. But you know, at the time I was like, well, I'm not, you know, officially home educating, so I would just sit there with my jaw like but yeah, it's you know, like you say, it's you know, it was a difficult period of time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you know, in terms of, you know, home educating your children, what does it look like for you? What did it look like then, and what does it look like now? You know, we're talking about, you know, children that are getting
Yeah.
older, you know, it's quite different from, I think, when you just sort of like dive in from the early years, and it's just sort of like a continuation of life at that point, isn't it? So how does that look different when they're older?
Yeah, I think we had a lot of undoing to do. So I think even though sort of like their early years were at school, and I'd still feel like, you know, they did gain things from that. But then I think I didn't realize how much it affected my youngest. So now we've sort of like propelled to sort of like where we are now. So they're 10 and 12. So you get that big question as well, sort of like, are they going to go to secondary?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That is such a big question at home ed. Oh, you home ed, are they going to go to secondary? Oh, they are going to take GCSEs, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. I really don't know whether they are. So I think you'd see a real shift in hormones for sure. That's one of the biggest things for me. And that's not just girls, 100% is it boys. And they take, all of a sudden you get this shift in opinions. So whereas before they're kind of going along with the family values and you're all doing stuff together, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I've got this whole person here who actually is like, I don't agree with you on that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what I love. I love this stage. It's hard because the hormones thrown in, they'll have ups and downs, they have good days, bad days, and some days we're butting heads because you're heading towards that more independence. But I love that they challenge me. I love that they say, yeah, I get that, you know, you really like that, but actually I don't agree with you, mum, I think this. And then we have loads of discussions, and I think that's so nice. And as long as there's things I do always instill in them, sort of like, okay, that's your opinion, but where's your backup? Like, what, how have you got to this opinion? Like, where are your facts from? Like, I don't want just, you know, all this stuff that's kind of thrown at you at YouTube. Is it fake? Is it not? Do you know what I mean? So they're really good at spotting sort of fake news. And they will say to me, no, because then I went and researched and I found this out. And actually, and I say, well, let's always look at both sides. So I think that's a big one, is that they challenge me more in a different way. And then I think sort of, yeah, their emotional side for sure. And that's something I just really want to nurture more than ever, is sort of making sure their mental health is as intact as I can. Like, no one can know, everyone's a different person. You can't know if you can only do your best, can't you, as a parent?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, they're definitely looking into the emotional development of a sort of preteen and teen mind has been so good for me, because it's sort of like, actually they're not ready for this. And I really link into sort of tweens being very similar to toddlers. So, you know, when they're kind of like, I want all this independence, I can do it myself, you know, I can do it all. You're probably finding it with your 2-year-old at the moment, like,
Yeah.
I can do it on my own, I'm fine. And you're like, actually you can't quite yet. Like, let me guide you a little bit and I'll help you find that way. So it's changed in that way, that I need to allow more independence with a kind of standoff guidance, if you know what I mean, rather than kind of just you're coming along with the ride. It's more their lead now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you're right, my 2-year-old is me do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, would you like me to put the bottom bit into the zip?
Yeah.
To get you started? No, me do it. And I'm like, okay, like,
Whereas mine are more of like an eye roll of like, I've got this, do you know what I mean, like, just leave me to do it. And then you're like, yeah, but do you just want me to? But eventually they'll come back and say, actually, yeah, can you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it, like with children, like, you know, mine, my eldest is coming up 5 soon, but it's like, babies are great and all that, babies are fantastic, like, you know, they're, but I love them as every time they're getting older, I'm enjoying it. Like, I enjoyed my daughter as a baby, of course, but as she gets older, you know, now she's got a lot more opinions.
Yeah.
I enjoy that as well. And, you know, we're still, you know, we're far behind where you are, but, you know, it's really interesting as their little personalities come through and you see who they are. And I find that with my 2-year-old at the moment, like, he's in that phase where you're just finding out like who this little person that's been living here for 2 years like really is.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think I love that you almost get like such a nice thing to have as a parent, isn't it? You get to know so many different people throughout their childhood. Like
Yeah.
they become so many different people in different phases. And yeah, I love that. You know, it almost changes as quick as, you know, the thing that they're into changes, but it's just so nice to see them develop. And yeah, I think I have to also remind myself that this section of my life is really enjoyable as well, because I think there is times with this particular age range it's tough.
Yeah.
Like you do butt heads and their emotions are all over the place. They want to stay up late, rise later, which is another privilege of home ed. So yeah, I think it's going with their emotional needs, but a lot of the hormones they're getting are the same ones we get for PMT. So
Yeah.
you can imagine like you're dealing with like a really sort of like frustrated, they don't know what they want sometimes. And I think that yeah, you have to kind of think, do you know what, this is actually still a really nice place to be with my kids and just enjoy those moments.
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes, isn't it, like I try and enjoy it where I'm at, and sometimes it's really difficult because, you know, like everybody will be like, oh, they grow up so quickly, enjoy it, and you're like, we feel then the pressure of like, I must enjoy it, but actually, you know, like some days are rubbish and some days are, you know, fantastic. Like there are some I'm sure you probably feel the same. Some weeks I'm like, I am bossing it, and then other weeks I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, normally depending on where I am in my cycle.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
Whether I'm absolutely smashing it or
yeah,
whether I'm like literally just don't know whether I've just gone wrong and have I made like the mistake. You know, I think as a home educator, you'll often look like I take things so personally. Like my kids will go, oh, do you know what, it's been really boring today. And I'm like, oh no, it's boring. What have I done wrong? How can I
yeah.
make it better? And I think sometimes that's my downfall. Rather than just going, yeah, it was boring today. I'm not going to lie to you. We didn't get much done. You haven't done much. And now I'm kind of passing that baton on to them though. I'm kind of going, okay, so what could you do? You know, what could you do? Like if it wasn't your favorite, you know, not every day is going to be your favorite, but this is your life. You can make it how you want it to be and enjoy sort of all the aspects of it. So yeah, I think you have to sometimes think not every day is going to be amazing. And I think social media hasn't helped us with that. Like
Yeah.
I think we've got this big conception, you know, preconception that actually it has to be amazing and we have to have everything perfectly placed. And particularly like home ed, it does feel like all eyes are on you. Like people want to know what you're doing. They want to know what curriculum you're covering. And you should see like some of my friends' faces when I'm like, we don't follow a curriculum. And they're like,
I know, it's funny because, you know, technically my daughter, she was, you know, she only would have started school in September. You know, she'd be in reception now, and so because a lot of her peers have gone to school, you know, like people often say to me like, how's home ed going? And I'm like, good. And I don't know what to say.
no.
Good. No, it was good yesterday, it was terrible the day before. And it's like, I don't know, like, and
Yeah.
same as you were saying earlier, you know, like people saying, oh, how long will you do it for? Like somebody said to me the other day, how long will you home educate for? You won't home educate for secondary school, will you?
Oh no.
And it's like, I remember this wasn't what I came up with, but I remember reading something once that was like, if I went through the school system myself from top to bottom, or bottom to top, whichever way you look at it, and I can't teach another person what I learned in that system, then does the system actually work?
Exactly.
Because I mean, I still remember Pythagoras' theorem. Have I used it? No. But like, you know, simultaneous equations, I couldn't not got the foggiest on what a simultaneous equation was even then. I don't think.
And that goes back to like what we were sort of chatting about, you know, before we started recording. It's sort of, if you're not fully interested in something, are you going to retain it? You just don't. And I think as well, how many people nowadays get to their sort of mid-30s and they're like, do you know what, I need a career change. This is not what I wanted. This is not. And I just wonder how much of that time, because you're following the curriculum, you're following everything that it tells you to do, how much time have you not had to figure out what you want? Do you know what I mean? You've got to tick all the boxes, you've got to do all the exams, but actually, what do you want out of life? And yeah, I remember them coming out of school, and the first thing I did with loads of my friends that sort of like were like, oh wow, you're home editing, was I started saying, yeah, well, they're going to do their GCSEs early, and they're going to we're going to be studying this, and we'll do 9 till 3. And I had all these like, ideas of like, I have to prove now that what I'm doing is better than better than what they're getting at school, but actually is without doing any of those things. Do you know what I mean? And I think like school has its place, and I know like it's the place for loads of people, it works. But seeing my 10-year-old now say to me, I genuinely hated school, I had no idea. He did not show that to me at all. And then coming out, he was like, I hated being asked to read in front of everybody, and he's dyslexic, so that was obviously tough. I went to his parents' evenings, and they would say what an amazing child he was. He was so good, like conformed and did so well, and inside he was none of those things. And I just think, yeah, figuring out yourself, I don't think there's enough space for that in schools, like who you are.
So I don't think so either. And it's like, even if our children went on and did GCSEs, like I'm the same as you. People ask me, my daughter's not even 5 yet, and they're like, she will do GCSEs, won't she? And I'm like, we're talking about something that's going to happen in a decade. GCSEs might not even exist in a decade for a start. And so yeah, it's funny. Like I think it comes from, and I'm no different, I went to school. I think it comes from like that really like schooled mindset, and it's sometimes really hard to even break away from it ourselves. And like we have to know where we're going. Like yes, everybody would be much more comfortable if we all said yes, they will do their GCSEs, yes, they'll do their A levels, then they'll go to university, then they'll get a good job, and then they'll go out and be a productive citizen.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it makes everybody else comfortable, and sometimes maybe not in a bad way, but I think sometimes like when you choose home education, it does make other people slightly uncomfortable. And I think I found like a little bit that because I have an opinion on the way I educate my children, some people feel like that's me being judgmental about the way they educate their children. And like, with all the best intentions, like I don't care what anybody else does with their children. Like I don't mean that in a bad way, but I care for what how my children are being educated, but how somebody else's children's being educated is their decision. And so I think sometimes when people make different decisions from us in all kinds of things, it brings up our decisions back into our face and makes us question, oh well, she's home educating and I think school was the better option.
This is where I think like the school playground doesn't help parents, because I think I remember being that parent stood there and you're all talking and you're all kind of getting this vibe, and I just found when I stepped away and became sort of the home educator, and probably became quite a bit like a hermit really, because I was kind of like, oh, I do want to go out, but I'm absolutely shattered from home editing, and I don't, and I kind of just, friendships changed.
Yeah,
some stayed really secure and some just kind of changed. But there was definitely that sort of judgment of, oh, she's a bit woo-woo home educating, and then there was like, people were supportive, but I do think they found it they got defensive. And I think when you step away, you tend to do that less.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of, when you're away from that whole environment, like you say, I don't care how they educate their children. But I think when it becomes a group of people maybe discussing, I'm sure people have discussed my choice, like when I first come away from school, I'm sure they did. And I think it's kind of like they want that reinforcement that what they're doing is right.
Yeah.
So kind of get that support network, which is great. And I think when you home ed, you do start to feel a little bit alone. And then you kind of, that's why I think Instagram and stuff like that is brilliant for home editing, because you kind of find your people from a distance. And the way that works brilliantly for us, because we haven't got to like actually physically be anywhere.
I love it. I'm so introverted that I'm actually like, this is the best way to meet people.
Exactly. Like you can get that social interaction without physically having to be there, and sort of like you're trying to juggle everything at once, and you can kind of dip in and out of it as you need. And I think other home eders get that, and it's quite nice. I think it's quite a nice community to be a part of.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, you know, like you're saying that it like people will question their own choice when confronted with someone else's choice. And, you know, all of the choices are the right choices. You know, our choice to home educate our children is the right choice for us at this stage of life with our children. And just as, like, you know, the next mum who decided that school is the best place for her child, you know, they're all the right choices, and everybody's just doing their best.
I think the tough one is when people feel they have no choice.
Yeah,
that's the hardest bit. I think when, you know, they've had to either home ed because school aren't providing what their children need, and that's made their life particularly difficult. And then equally, I think on the flip side, you've got people that would love to home ed, but, you know, practically it doesn't work for them. So I think that are the times when it's really tough. I think other than that, you're kind of just doing it because it works for you. And then I think the times when it's, you know, it's not working for you and you're being forced for that choice, that's really, like, that's another level. That's really tough.
Yeah, I've spoken to people on Instagram before who've said, like, I wish I could home educate, but, you know, they've got to go to work. And, you know, that is, you know, I know I've heard people say, like, well, you know, people home educate all different times of day and blah, blah, blah. You know, it doesn't have to be 9 till 3, which is, you know, fair. We don't home educate, you know, like on a strict schedule. But, you know, the practicality of having to go to a workplace and having childcare for that, it doesn't work for everybody. And while, you know, some people, you know, can be flexible, you know, I can work flexibly. And, you know, so actually between the hours of, you know, 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, I am their primary caregiver while their dad is at work. And so it just requires a flexibility around that. But that's
and
not
compromise. Like, it isn't just like gifted. Like, it's not just like, oh, I'm so privileged I get to be in this position. Like, there's a hell of a lot of compromise and sacrifice involved.
there is.
You know,
Yeah, I do think often home education is viewed as, you know, oh, you know, you're so privileged to be able to do that. And to an extent, I agree. But also on the flip side, it's like you say, it comes with sacrifice.
that's the other thing, is you also get the flip side of that. Well, it's your choice. It's your choice to home ed. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't mean I can't have a bad day. It doesn't,
and I can't whinge about it.
it doesn't mean that, you know, sometimes, you know, me and my kids are just having a rough time, and they're irritating me and I'm irritating them, and we're just not a good day. And I have got some really good friends I can have a really good rant to, but I also wouldn't do that with anyone because I feel a bit guarded about my sort of like choices and stuff. And I feel like people think, oh, well, if you're having a rough day, send them back to school. And it's kind of like, well, no, I'm just having a bad day.
Yeah, you know, you can have a bad Saturday, right? And they'd still be there, whether
And
they're
so your
at school
kids
or
not
not.
have a bad day at school and come home have had a bad day at school. You know, it's not. We all have some bad days.
Yeah, and, you know, like, we're all human, and I think sometimes with children, I don't know if it's more of a young children idea, or maybe it's all children, I don't know, but we kind of expect children not to be grumpy. You know, like, they can't have a bad day. And, you know, sometimes my kids will be like unhappy for some reason, and I'm like, what is wrong with them? And it's like, well, actually, maybe they're just miserable. Because
and maybe actually sometimes it's kind of like, are they feeding off of us? You know what I mean? Like, but then I can have a day where I get up and I feel like I'm in a really good mood, and it's that expectation. Like, I have all of a sudden pictured how my day's going to go, and then the kids will rise, and it's kind of like, no, that's not how it's going at all. That's out the window. That's not it anymore. And then I get like a little bit like, well, that's not how I wanted my day to go. Like a little bit of inner child, like, no, I don't want it. So it is just adapting to everybody's personalities. And obviously you spend a lot more time together. So in society, particularly in our sort of, you know, British society, you're with your kids, you know, maybe until they're 4. Like, realistically, that's when you're spending all your time together. And then all of a sudden we've extended that. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like you've got to adapt to all these different personalities that are going to come along the way. And I just think we've, you know, but I do think there's a place missing for that family. I don't think you should become too disconnected too soon, personally.
Yeah, I think our society, I think it tries to separate family, whether
Yeah.
you choose education in school or at home, however that looks. The whole goal is always the separation. Like if you even think about like some of the new like childcare legislation they want to put in, that
Yeah.
parents can go back to work, they want to support childcare from a year, which is great if that's what you want.
Mhm.
But it never looks on the flip side. It never looks at what about the parents that are forced to go back to work but don't want to. Like there's no support. And like I know it's like a really sticky thing, because it's like I didn't go back to work after I had the children, and not in like a traditional sense.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I say like, well, I think there should be more support for mums or dads that want to stay at home, then people can be a bit like, yeah, well, your husband takes care of you. And it's like, well, naturally, if anyone's doing the taking care,
Yeah.
right?
I'd like to see how he'd get on without.
Yeah. And it's like, when we're sorting out mortgage and stuff, like we have no childcare costs because somebody, me,
Yeah.
is doing that unpaid. And
I don't think we as a society integrate our lives anymore. So like I mean probably you're sort of the age of your children are now, and I remember mine, people always go, oh, what are your kids into? Do you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden you get to the tweens and teens, no one asks you that anymore. It's like you're not meant to know what they're doing. It's
yeah,
kind of like they'll have their own interests, but they're not meant to share them with you. And I think, yeah, staying kind of entwined as a family, I think, is really important. Like you need to know, and I'm not saying that people don't know what their kids are doing. I'm sure they do, and I'm sure they say interested, but it just all of a sudden the narrative of how you're asking about your kids is different. Like it's more about sort of like, oh, what problems are they bringing to you right now?
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I really do think that there is sort of like this separation between there's that quote, isn't it, like that the world expects like mothers to work like they don't have children, and like parent like they don't go to work. And it's so true. Like there's no connection between the two. Like actually probably what most predominantly women, because it's predominantly women that do stay home and are the caregivers, what most women want is probably like flexible working, and you can actually be able to mesh it all together, because there are plenty of women that actually want to return to work in some capacity but can't do the
I would love to
40-hour week.
see the productivity of like people that could have more flexible time.
Yeah.
And I do think we have seen a shift in that. Like I do think there's not so many 9 to 5 roles. I think we are seeing more of sort of flexible working, and I think the jobs that are coming up are also, going back to sort of briefly, I do tend to dive off, but talking about jobs, like people ask about GCSEs, we have no idea what the jobs are going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, so sort of like jobs change all the time. And I think there's been a real shift since COVID, that there's now more flexible working. And I think people are choosing different career options. And I think they were allowed to maybe discover what they wanted in that space. And I think there's going to be a real shift. And we don't know where our kids are going to. Like nobody can predict the future. We don't know what the jobs are going to be. Great, you could have 9 GCSEs, but actually the job you want to do, they want to know if you can cut wood properly. Do you know what I mean? Like it is shifting now, and I don't think people are so driven by the academics, which is brilliant in my opinion. Like I think as well, we need to see more mental health coming in, particularly in like these teen years. Like their development is sort of like towards the GCSE stages, their actual emotional and sort of mental capacity should not be the time that you're taking 9 exams.
Yeah.
Like it's just completely the wrong time. Like they have not got the capacity to do that. Like their pathways in their brain are not even anywhere near taking on that amount of pressure. And I think that's why unfortunately you see so much, so many kids under so many pressures, and they suicide rates are crazy. And it's just, I just think, I hope we're shifting And actually people aren't putting so much pressure on these academic things. Like, you can take your GCSEs whenever you want. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to do
and
it.
you can do anything whenever you want. I mean, so I did like traditional GCSEs, A levels, went to university, and when I finished university, I wanted to do my masters, but I didn't do it straight away. And I finished university when I was 21. I went back when I was 28. And did my master's open learning with the Open University while working. I didn't have children at the time. I think that would have been a whole other a whole other thing. So anybody that does it with children as well, like, hats off, because it's
I've just signed up to mine.
Amazing. You'll be fine. Honestly, when
I'm a bit older, it's okay.
when I went to my Open University graduation, I went to the Barbican in London. That's where I graduated from, and they had this like little film on, and it was just like not like a promotional thing, but it just like, it had people working in all kinds of environments, right? So people like scribbling on notepads, sitting in bed by like a torchlight, people at tables in like office canteens, people working, you know, on their beds at their dining room table, like, and it was just like the perfect video for how Open University is. Like, people are just getting it done. And I always say, so I did history for both of mine. And so when I did my bachelor's degree, like, I was obviously like proud of myself. Like, I remember being like, wow, like, I did it. But I've never been prouder of myself than when I got my master's degree, because I knew the absolute like determination that it took. I had to drop hours at work. I didn't have to, but I chose to drop hours at work so that I could focus on that. So I had to take a reduced income. And I just worked so hard for it. And, in all of these little pockets of time, I got married in the middle of it. Just so much was going on.
Because you really wanted it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that's where I'm like, that's what I mean.
And it just proves like you can do it at any time. You don't have to do GCSEs when you're 15 and 16. You can do them. Like, I know people that have got no GCSEs at school and, went and did them later. Like, my mum never did A levels at school, because when she went to school, not many people went on and did A levels. She wanted to do her English A level when she was older. So she went back to college and did it.
Exactly. And there's no, sort of going back years and years ago, it used to be you went to, college and university and you're guaranteed this high paying job. Like, if you came out of uni, you were going to get this job. It's not like that anymore, because kind of uni caught on and everyone was like, oh, I want a piece of that. And kind of like, and then it became that sort of, there was only so few jobs for so many people coming out of university. And sort of like you were saying, you were so proud of yourself because you stuck and got true grit and pushed and wanted it. And we're expecting the same from our children, and they don't want it. They don't even know what they want.
And it's like, when you're at school, like, you pick your GCSEs when you're like, what, 13 or 14? It's like, who has the foggiest idea on what they want to do when they're 13 and 14? And then, like, I know school has like tons of like issues. I've got to timetable it right, but I wanted to do history, but I'd have loved to have done geography as well, but I couldn't do geography if I wanted to do history because they were at the same time.
It's crazy because they could work so nicely alongside each other for any job that might involve history.
And so it's crazy. Like, you're already like putting yourself in a box anyway, because it's like, well, it was lucky for me that I picked history over geography, because it could have very easily gone the other way, and then I might not have ended up doing what I do. And so
you might have lost all enjoyment. Do you know what I mean? If your passion was history, it's kind of, and I just think there's no flexibility either. You've locked in at like 13, you've locked in those things that you're doing. Like, if you want to change subjects in that time, you've got to then go, I remember I wanted to drop art and take geography, and actually my tutor was like, don't do that. And she was right, to be fair, she was right. But it was kind of like, I had to go to like a meeting with my tutor and sort of say, I really want to change, and they were like, no, you can't change. And with like, you can't help but the school will have to meet a certain criteria. So they will want, I mean, they've changed it to numbers now, won't they? But they will want X amount of A stars. So they will push you to where you're performing. Whether
Yeah.
you're enjoying that or not doesn't really come into it, because they need their grades. And I get that, they need to somehow figure out whether they're performing well or not. Somehow they've got to do it. But we've now come so far away from creative, like we are now so far into academic, that we've lost along the way all of the sort of holistic learning. Really, it's now just what gets us the grades, how hard can we push these kids, and let's just farm them out, and then off they go to college and that's done. So I think it's really, and I don't want to paint a bad picture of school, because for some kids that they absolutely thrive and they do really well, and I'm not here to sort of badmouth school, but I just think schools could play a bigger role. You shouldn't have to remove your children. For some people that they're having to remove their children because of severe mental health issues, you shouldn't have to do that. Like, that should be a safe space. That should be where they're going to be safe. And pressure is just another huge reason why we do home ed.
And like you said earlier as well, whether our children do GCSEs or not, like, we don't know what world that is going to be for them. What jobs will exist. I always say to my mum about parenting, it's like, I can't parent my children the same way as you parented me, because that world doesn't exist anymore. Like, I'm 38 years old, and 38 years ago the world was a very different place. And I can only parent in the world that I'm raising my children for now, and hope that it all marries up in the end. But
then we're on a back foot, really, aren't we? Like, we're parenting them in the now and preparing them for something we don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like,
maybe there'll be like hoverboards and stuff like that.
But I was looking at sort of courses for my son, because he does prefer to tutor. Like, he does enjoy being tutored now, rather than me teaching him. And I had no idea there was an esports course. Like, they don't offer that at school. I think now, obviously, it's hard for me to say, because I'm not actually in it, and I haven't actually been in the secondary thing as a parent at all, because we didn't go into it. But like, so the whole like gaming thing has taken off big time. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of like, there's going to be a whole industry there, and avenues that I don't know. I think for me, they can learn all the core subjects. Like, another thing I get asked all the time is also, what do they do for maths, English and science? Like, okay, well, actually, when he's gaming, he's doing maths. Do you know what I mean? Like, my son's reading has improved so much because of Roblox. Like, because he's passionate. He wants to know what people are saying. He wants to know what the game's asking of him. Whereas if I sit him, he was a non-reader. He didn't want to read. He hated reading. And it took me a long time to just completely leave the books to one side before he would actually then open up and read. And it's completely self-taught. And I think, well, I say completely, obviously he did go to school, so he did do phonics and stuff, but his level of reading has progressed purely down to for what he wanted it for. So I think you can learn all of those core subjects through one thing that they're interested in.
You
have to divide it up.
And I think as well, some of home education is, as a parent, observing, like, okay, there's a bit of maths going on there. Like, they don't necessarily, they're just enjoying themselves and learning along the way. And sometimes it's a lot of parents being like, oh, hold on a minute, like, oh, we're measuring something for a cake, this is maths. And and like, just remembering in my head, this was maths. When that local authority report finally drops on my mat, I'll remember this.
That's why I backwards plan. So I literally, like, at the end of the day, I'll write notes of what we've done instead of planning what we're going to do. I take notes of what we've done, and then I might sort of like put a little star by it and be like, right, well, that was maths and that links to that. And I think, like you say, when that LA, I've never been asked for one, but when that time comes, which I'm sure it will, I want to be able to say, not for the sake of proving to them, but I want to be able to say, yeah, we're doing all right, and we're doing it differently, but we're still meeting all of those sort of criteria. And I just think there's almost too much to learn at school as well. Do you know what I mean? There's almost like, you can learn I think particularly as you move into the tweens and teens, it needs to be relevant, otherwise they won't want to learn it.
Yeah.
And if it's relevant to them, like my son can literally, if you show him a picture of anywhere in the world, just the shape of the country, he'll tell you what country it is. And that is not none, not myself, my husband, tutors, no one's taught that. He just loves countries and just so.
If you think about us as adults, right, sometimes my daughter will ask me a question and I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, so let's look it up. And so we look it up, and then I've given her the answer and she's walked off, and I'm like, did you know
Yeah.
crocodiles? And like, I was reading about, my mum sent me a news article the other day about the I think it's a Portuguese man of war jellyfish, right, that they were washing up on the beach in Dorset. And so I showed my daughter a picture because they're all like fantastic colours. And she was like, oh, what is it? And I was like, it's a jellyfish. And then when I read about it, it's not just a jellyfish. It's actually like I can't even remember what it's called, like a zooid or something. It's basically like 4 or more different animals basically that are together. They work together, and they're in charge of like different things. So like one part of the organisms is like feeding, the other one is like reproduction. And I was just like, did you know this about it? Like, they've all gone, they don't care. But I'm like, they're
when your husband gets in as well and you're like, did you know?
Like, did you know a Portuguese man of war is a zooid? He'd be like, I don't know what a zooid is.
My husband's always saying to me, who do we home educate for? Because it's like you're just like learning so much.
Yeah, it just proves like we're learning all the time, so why would nobody else be learning all the time, right?
I think it comes back to that brain development thing, that when you're older, I do think personally, when you're in your 30s, all of a sudden you're like, I want to learn, like I want to know it all. I want, I'm interested in something and I want to research it, and I want to, I don't know whether that's just particularly my brain, because I do tend to go down like little rabbit holes.
Oh yeah, I'm always like 10 pages deep in Google.
Yeah, exactly. And
I started off
papers and everything. Yeah. But I just think like that's when you want to learn, and until you get that want to learn, and I think unfortunately that's what is lost along the way of when you're being forced, is that want to learn. And I always instill now, as long as they want to learn, whether it's something I want them to learn or someone else wants them to learn, doesn't matter. As long as they want to learn something, then that's okay, because they will always have that then going forward. They will always want to know something. And that's where I think, there's this big thing around screen time, isn't there? And it's sort of like, too much screen time. And I must admit, like, we've had times in the past where we've had to get a balance, but I do think there is a place for things like YouTube.
Yeah.
And I think gaming, and I do think we're now fortunate enough, I think it's kind of good and bad. Like, there's almost so much information out there that it's kind of like, well, how do we filter through all this? But then at the same time, how lucky are we to be able to pick up a phone and be like, right, well, let's have a look. Let's see what that is and know about our wider world. Yeah. And I think there's definitely a place for it. I mean, mine love their screens, they love their games, but equally they love going out, they love traveling, they love seeing stuff. So like when we go traveling and we go and see different places, like screens are gone, do you know what I mean? And that's not me telling them, like they'll want them in the evening to chill out like we all do.
Yeah.
But generally that they will embrace the world as well as find stuff out on their screen, and often they back each other up.
Yeah. So I mean, we recently stopped using screens, not because we were like, that's it, no one's using screens ever again, that's the end of it. We actually was redoing our living room, and we took the telly out because my son is so little. I didn't have a strap that stopped it falling over, and I was like, we'll take it out, we'll put it upstairs, and I'll get a strap off Amazon. And when we took it out, nobody cared, and it took a few days for the strap to arrive, and we still haven't put it back. And so like when I say that to people are like, you don't watch TV, and it's like, well, we didn't have time anyway.
Yeah.
So, our kids go to bed later than, let's say, the average of children that age, And so, but that's a decision that we've made, you know, the late to bed.
Rise later. Do you know what I mean? So I think as long as they're getting their quota of sleep.
Yeah. I mean, my kids don't wake up till 9 o'clock, and I'm like,
No,
I'm not
I
mad
don't.
about that. I am not mad about that at all. So, you know, we're quite happy with that. But, you know, when it comes to screens, like, we've had periods of time where we've had like a balance of screens, we've had too much screen time, and I can tell when we've got too much screen time, like everything's a bit wobbly, and at the moment we've just got a period of no screens. It won't be forever. It definitely won't be forever.
No, but you need that detox time. I think that's really good. I think it's nice to have that break and that detox, and kind of like, and while it's working, it comes down to everything. While it's working, do it. Like, it's not working, change it.
Yeah,
like,
and it's not like we're mega strict. Like, you know, the kids are downstairs now, and I dare say one of them is playing on my husband's phone because it's got like the Samson's kids games. I mean, like they play like racing cars on there, and so it's not like this strict. Like, we don't have TV. I told a friend the other day, like she told me to watch something, and I was like, oh, we haven't got TV at the moment. She was like, oh, what? And I was like, so we cancelled Netflix, and we had Disney Plus as well. And it's like, do you know what? For a period of time, it's fine. Like, I love Formula One. I love Drive to Survive when it comes on Netflix. So when it's Drive to Survive season, I'm paying for Netflix again. But until then, like, you know, it's fine. We're doing fine without it. And, you know, there'll be a time where they have screens again. And we're not perfect. We're certainly not perfect. You know, we're on screens a lot as well. And but you know, you said about your children wanting them in the evening to wind down, and you know, that's how I use my phone sometimes as well. Just, you know, I know there's so much online about, like, you know, you shouldn't be like mindlessly scrolling, and it's like, you know what, actually sometimes I just want to decompress and mindlessly scroll someone else's life.
and I think actually when you're doing that, obviously, I think the main thing with screens, and actually it's something I kind of wrote down, like screens, it's being mindful. Like, as long as you are mindful and you're just kind of focused, it's not starting to affect your life, then there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's okay to just sometimes zone out everything and just kind of just, I don't know, just like you say, just scroll and just, I don't know, if it's relaxing you.
Yeah,
I agree. You know, there is loads of research to prove that you should not have screens before bed. Loads. And I do catch myself sometimes thinking, actually, you know what? I'm not sleeping better now. So now's the time to stop that and change it up. And yeah, I think particularly as your children move to be more independent with screens, so you're no longer kind of next to them or you can hear them, that's when you need to really instill the safety measures.
yeah.
That's when it comes in. Like, almost all of my son's games have a parental control of some way, so you can turn off swearing, you can turn off blood. Like, I tell my friends this and they're like, what? I'm like, you can, because like my eldest hates it. He's like, oh, everyone else has got it on. I'm like, well, so yeah, like, I think you can, there's so many different, like, and also not just putting the parental control on, but having conversations with them. Like, I think I went to what was called a Two Johns talk. There's these two guys, they're ex-police officers, and they've set themselves up as kind of like internet safety and stuff. And I went to a talk once, and they kind of said, don't punish, never punish. So when they come, you know, when something's happened, they've messed up on their game, or they've maybe accidentally spoken to someone they shouldn't have done, or, you know, make sure they can come to you first.
Yeah.
Make sure they know that you're a safe space. You're not going to take it away from them, because as soon as you say, I'm taking it away, they're not going to tell you anymore.
Yeah.
They don't want their thing taken away. So I think that's, you know, and across the board with tweens is communication. Like, I have a thing with my eldest, we often text. So sort of like, that's again another screen, but he'll often send me funny videos he's watched, or I'll send him some back. And then we also have something that's called a back and forth book. So you write in the book and it stays in the book, you don't talk about it. So you kind of communicate that way. And that's for like the bigger things that he just might not want to tell me, or I'll sort of say, how are you today? Oh, I've had a rough day, this made me feel this. And then he'll say, my day's been okay. And I think, and then we don't talk about it unless the book says, do you want to talk about it? Yes, I want to talk about it. So I think that sort of face to face sometimes is really hard for them at that age.
Yeah.
They don't want to sit there and tell you something that maybe they're ashamed of doing, or maybe they feel pressure over. And yeah, goes back to that thing, like when everyone tells you got to in a car. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're going to have a conversation, have it in a car, because you're not at each other, and you can kind of have your best conversations without, and be more vulnerable without sort of seeing someone's reaction. So I think, yeah, communication across the board, particularly with screens, and just in general, just checking in on them. If you're communicating, they will grunt and not want to talk to you a lot of the time, but show up for them all the time, because even if they don't want it, they do really.
I love that. The idea of that back and forth book is fantastic. It's really, really great. Yeah. I'm banking all of this for
Yeah.
But you're right, you know, like sometimes, you know, being a teenager is hard. It's really hard. Like we were all one once, and we all remember, you know, I wasn't the nicest. And, you know, it's really, really difficult sometimes to express. Listen, it's hard to express your emotions sometimes as an adult, and we expect a lot of children.
Yeah.
We do expect a lot of children in terms of their, you know, their emotional intelligence isn't, my emotional intelligence sometimes isn't up there. So, you know, how we can expect it of children as well. So, you know, something like that book that,
yeah,
you can write it down, is because
just allows that space, doesn't it? You know, that space without, and also I think it kind of gets them into the habit of journaling without kind of saying, sit down and write something every night.
yeah.
You know, like, sometimes, like, I'm not, you know, don't get me wrong, sometimes we won't use it for weeks, and then all of a sudden I'll think, oh, I'll just write him a message, and sometimes it's silly. But I remember one particular time he was really cross, and he'd gone into his room and sort of slammed the door, you know, full on, like, we're really unhappy right now. And this book came out from under the door, and I was just like, okay, so we are ready to communicate then. And then it kind of like just broke it down, and we had a little chat back and forth, like his opinion, my opinion, without sort of talking over each other. And then it kind of ended up with something silly, like he posted a feather back to me and was like, here's a feather. Like, it was just really, and then the door opened and all was well. And I think sometimes, as much as you want to have verbal communication, that can just heat everything up, do you know? And you're getting worked up.
Yeah, and you know, we're all different personalities as well. Like I am a short fuse, and so actually writing things down would probably be better. Because, you know, otherwise, you know, I could get really het up quickly, especially when I was a teenager. And, you know, when you're just like, you know, butting heads all the time, nothing gets resolved. But actually, when you've got a bit of time and space to maybe write it,
and it's not you ignoring it as well. So like, whereas, you know, you sort of go, right, calm down, once we're all calmed down, we'll talk about it. You don't, because you're like, oh god, it's calm now, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's definitely and I never leave mine to sort of, I allow them the space to be cross, because I have this big thing, all emotions are valid. Like, I want to see you angry, I want to see you sad, I want, you know, I think we have this big picture, especially now, that wellness is kind of like happiness. Be wellness, you have to be happy, and you have to be, and I think that's a lot of pressure on teenagers. Like social media now, you know, everybody's doing yoga, everyone's eating healthy, it's great, you know, it's brilliant, that's what everyone should be doing, but that doesn't mean happiness.
No, I think for like a really long time as well, there's been a lot of like, you know, like toxic positivity as well, in that, you know, all of these things, like I do gratitude journaling, not every day, I haven't done it for the last few days, but try and do it every day, as much as possible, and it's not always like, I'm not writing like, oh, I'm so thankful for, you know, this, that and the other, and it's not always that positive, because a lot of it has sometimes a more negative spin to it. And the reason I'm like grasping at gratitude, because it's like, okay, like this is going on and this is going on and life is hard, and
you know, but I am grateful for this. It's like a bit of a light in the darkness. But I think for a long time there's been like a lot of toxic positivity in that, like you say, that it just equals being happy all the time, and it's not. It doesn't feel that, like, you know, this year for me has been, well, so we're recording in 2023. I should probably justify that. But this year you know, 2023 has been rough. It's been a really, really hard year, and for so many different reasons. It's just been actually like one thing after the other, really. I'm like, 2024's got to be better. It's got to be better. And you get years like that, don't you, where it's just like it just spirals and spirals all year long. And yeah, it's been hard going. And like, so, you know, I will share, I try and share, like, life is a bit at the moment. But for a long time, it has been, I think the whole sort of wellness and everything has been very much focused on, you need to be happy. And, you know, being happy is great, but it's not achievable in like 100% of the time.
You should be sad.
Yeah,
like, do you know, you should be sad. There's times that things are going to come up. You need to be sad. Like, there's times that come up, you need to be angry, frustrated. Like, if you're not expressing those emotions, then they're getting trapped, aren't they? Because you're not going to go through life and never be sad. Like, that's just never going to happen.
And, you know, with my children as well, you know, sometimes I have a short fuse and I will shout when I didn't mean to shout. And sometimes I am upset, and sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm stressed. And, you know, sometimes, you know, I'm sure it's the same for probably every parent. Like, we react to something not how we wish to react. And I always make sure that however I react to something, I apologize. If I've done something wrong, I will always say, like, I'm sorry, I am stressed and it's not your fault. But, you know, I want them to see the whole range of human emotion. I don't want them to think like, oh, mummy's always happy, or mummy's always mad, or whatever.
Mine always say to me, like, why are you always so grumpy come bedtime? I'm like, because I'm tired. Because I'm really tired, and you two go to bed so late now. Like, I'm just done. By the time I get to bed, I'm done. And now, like, I explain that to them, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you know. And I said, you know, when you're tired, your body can't function properly. You are going to be a bit more short-tempered. It's natural. And like you say, you do need to express all of that. And I read something the other day that said, when you react to something your child does, is it you or is it your inner child? And I was like, do you know what? I had this the other day. So my youngest was at climbing, and he loves climbing, adores it, but the whole setup had changed and it had thrown him off a bit. And I was getting really sort of worked up, like, well, you need to go to the club, you need to do this, you need to. And do you know what? That comes from where I didn't commit to a club when I was younger. And I was like, but you'll do so well. And he was doing so well, and I just wanted it so badly for him. But that was my inner child. And actually, if I'd just kind of gone, do you know what? Don't worry about it this week. It's fine. Like, you'll breeze it next week. So I think we do get caught up. You're never gonna completely eradicate your inner child. Like, they will always be there. And that's why we're in such a nice position to kind of, we are building theirs. Do you know what I mean? Like, that inner child is going to be in them when they're grown. So I think which then puts a lot of pressure on yourself. Like, you want to do so desperately want to do well. And I don't think there can't be a parent out there that doesn't want well for their children, however that looks. You know, there's so many different things going on out there, but ultimately you must want to do well. And I think particularly if you've chosen home ed, I think you've passionately got something that you feel like you've got to give. You know, you've taken the dusty path, haven't you? You haven't followed the normal route, so there's something that you feel that you can guide and do. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to do it right, but you can't always, you can't.
So I was going to ask you as well, so you were talking about, as your teenagers, your tweens, almost teens, are, getting older and, growing in more independence. How do you, with like home education, encourage encourage that freedom and autonomy in their learning and in their education. How do you do that in their home education? How is that different from when they were sort of maybe younger?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to the whole communication thing. So allowing for that independence, and that type, for one, we do subject choice, so they choose what they want to learn. So which I think you kind of do when they're younger anyway, but it's now maybe that little bit more structured. So like for my eldest, he will choose what courses he wants to do or what tutoring he wants to do, and then it's really hard because my two learn very differently. One loves to be taught online, get involved, and he likes to do, you know, all the quizzes and stuff that they do. The other one is far more, I want to kind of find my own way. I don't want someone to teach me. I'll choose something and I'll figure it out for myself. So I think that allows independence, for one, because you're chopping and changing to what suits each child. Yeah, I think you just have to allow space. I think the biggest thing is allowing them space and listening to them. Like, our whole home ed thing chops and changes all the time. So I've now got to the point that I've had to say, you know, if we're going to sign up to something, we are going to do the term, because otherwise we kind of drop out a little bit too quick. So that they will choose something, they're like, yeah, we'll give it a go. And also I think that allows, what I found I was doing a lot was slipping back into kind of not giving stuff long enough. So maybe going to it once or twice and then kind of thinking, oh no, I don't like it, and then actually, no, we need to try a little bit longer and see how it goes. So I think, yeah, they definitely get subject choice. Allowing for their emotional needs allows them more independence, and I'm passing them more and more ownership over their own learning, and that allows also for when they mess up. So like, I'm not always going to step in. So if they haven't done something, see how that plans out. Do you know what I mean? See how that works. And actually, the more I step off, because we don't do any sort of structured learning. We don't really do any structured learning anyway, but we definitely don't during school holidays.
Yeah,
we tend to just come away because they still have school friends and it just suits us. But the more I step back in those times, I feel like they learn more.
Yeah,
because I step back and I take the pressure off myself, and we do life. It's really hard to say structure wise. We literally just live, like, and they learn through that, but they have way more say and kind of, I suppose, control over choices we make as a family, for sure. Like when it comes to sort of holidays, what they want to see, what we're going to visit, that comes massively into it. And then I think that allows for it. And for me, it's all about opportunities. If I can give them as many opportunities as possible and they take ownership over it, then that's the best way for me.
Yeah, it was really funny. It just reminded me of something. So when my daughter was in her first official week, even though like we've known we were going to home educate them since my daughter was born, so for us it's just a continuation of life, right? It's just because we've always known it. We had the discussion when I was pregnant with her. We've always known that was the direction, so therefore it only felt like a big moment, I guess, because everybody else was going to school. So it felt like that big moment that I wanted to like mark, like, okay, so this is the official beginning. And I posted on Facebook, which I don't do very often, at the end of like that first week. And I posted some pictures, like our first official, like starred in between stars, first official week of home education. And somebody I went to school with, who I am just an acquaintance of like 20 years ago, right? Not somebody that I have spoken to since or have anything to do with, which is what Facebook is really, but just a collection of people I went to school with. And he left this massive comment about like, you should be so embarrassed, like that they look like, basically like the kids, it was like a really hot week, I think the first week, that would have been the first week of school, and they were just like in the paddling pool in the garden, and also just like having fun really. And yeah, he was like, you should be so embarrassed. He didn't spell embarrassed right either. But he was like, you should be so embarrassed that, you know, then you're not teaching them anything. And I was like, this just looks like like school holidays. And I'm like,
that's the point.
I'm doing it exactly how I want to be doing it.
Yeah.
And the most annoying thing about that was then he blocked me before I even got to the message, because I'm if I do post on Facebook, I post and then I check like 4 days later, and like 3 other people had given him like a telling off, not like home educators, but 3 other people had given him a telling off, and I'd missed the whole lot, just living in blissful ignorance. But that's sometimes the kind of people we have to come up against. And you know, as far as I was concerned, I was like, well, I'm quite pleased by that.
Yeah, I think it's just this whole perception, isn't it, that if you're home ed, you're uneducated. Like, yeah. It just confuses me, because I just think the pressure sometimes, like particularly in secondary, is that not damaging in itself?
I think sometimes with home education, like you know, we do come up against, like we said earlier, you know, we come up against a lot of opinions, whether it be socialization or whatever, and sometimes it can be hard not to react. I find it difficult being newer to home ed. I guess everybody goes through the same periods of time where eventually you must get to a point where you're like, I just don't even care what you're not talking about anymore. But it can be difficult, can't it, you know, when people are like judging your, you know, whether it be what they think you're educating the children, or
I think it depends how, you know, sometimes you get more defensive than others. And I think as well, with social media, negativity breeds quicker. So like if you put a post up, I don't get hardly any sort of that I get sort of like a few likes, you know, in this grand scheme of things of what it's, you know, how big it can be, and I'll get a few people comment. I put one post on that I'd kind of done, you know, where you do sort of like a share of someone else's post and you like react to it, and I put that on and it went crazy. Like literally, like for me, like I'm going from sort of something like, I don't know, 300 views, and this was like 17,000 views.
Amazing.
And it was like, everyone was like, I don't agree with this, I don't like, and it was just this guy saying home educated kids are well-rounded, they communicate well, and I was just like, yeah, I agree with that. And I put it on and they were like, this is just one guy's viewpoint, and I was like, oh, okay. So I think like negativity always breeds quicker. Like people are so quick to tell you what you're doing wrong, and like you're sharing all this lovely nice stuff and like trying to give like your view on something, and everyone's like,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I shared a post of an account, like a home ed account, and it was something like, I can't even remember exactly what it was, but it was something about like another day where I didn't have to put my hand up to use the toilet or something along those lines, right? And I just shared it on my stories. Nothing else. I didn't say anything. I just shared it. And it was basically like, you know, basically along the lines of like, isn't it ridiculous that in school we cannot just go to the toilet, right? That should be the norm. If you need to go to the toilet, you don't have to put your hand up and only one of you can go at a time. Or, you know, if you have a bodily function, you should be able to go and do it.
Yeah.
And an actual real life friend of mine took such offense to it on my Instagram, and was like, really just went mad in my inbox at me about like how like basically how dare you you're always implying that school educated children, you know, get the rough end of the deal. And it's like, you could have messaged me this privately if you had this much anger about it. Like she went mad at me, and I didn't even reply. I was like,
it's crazy, isn't it? Like because we're behind this screen, like everyone thinks, well, I'm just gonna have a go at you. Like, I think now, like I just look at Instagram for me as building a community with
Yeah.
like-minded people, and I feel like I'm really doing that, and it's so lovely to just, and we're all different, like
Yeah.
there's not one, like I can't say on sort of like my whole Instagram I'll be like, oh, they home-ed exactly the same as me. Like we all home-ed so differently, and like we all have, as you know, different family values, different religions, you know, it's so vast. And I just think, why are people so quick to get at someone? Like,
Yeah, I know. I
that
think
person's life is not affecting you.
yeah.
Like,
I at the time when I got that message, I was a bit like what I just said. This is a you problem. Right? You have taken offense over this. And if that's, you know, if you are angry about, like, I don't know, about me home educating, or if you've got some questions about the decisions you've made, that's a you problem. Don't bring them to my door, because I do not have.
We've got a sort of like, you know, 30+ year brain to deal with that. And then you think, like, come next year, my son is old enough to be on TikTok, to be on like so many of the social media platforms. His brain is not gonna, like, he will be like, what are you coming at me for? Do you know what I mean? And you can see how this can just build and build, and it's like there needs to be so much more in place. Like, you can't be letting 13-year-olds out into this social platform and there be no rules. Like, it just absolutely baffles me, and that's why I spend a lot of time teaching them you don't need to react. Like, sometimes the best thing to do is not react. And there's a place for it all, and I think, like, they need to understand the platforms for what they are as well. Like, that is not real life. I mean, to be honest with you, they're better at it than me. I think because they've grown up with it their whole lives, they will sort of say to me, oh, that's fake. And I'll like show them a video, I'll be like, no, that's fake. And I'll be like, what do you mean it's fake? And they're like, well, you can tell, like, the way they're doing that, that's fake. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I think, like, they are so better prepared than I realize. But I think it's that natural mum protection of, like, or so I think definitely as we step through into sort of like the teens, I think we need to, education is everything. Like, as long as you're getting a good understanding of what these platforms are and how to navigate them, then that's, and you can do that together. Like, you know, you can figure it out together. I mean, I spend a lot of time researching how to make these apps safe. Like, it's hard.
It's been really so wonderful having you come and talk with me today. So where can everyone connect with you online?
So it is Instagram. It is following their education. So following_their_education.
Excellent. And I will link that as well. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It's been really interesting. I found it really interesting to see what's in my future. But thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you, Amy. Thanks.
You're more than welcome.
What an amazing conversation with Toni. I found it so fascinating. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, so often I talk to people who are in the early stages of home education, or, you know, just referring to myself, you know, being in the early stages of home educating my children. And so it's so fascinating to just have this other look at what is sort of like beyond those early years, those primary years, and what it can look like beyond that. And so it was so interesting to sit down and chat with Toni. You can obviously check her out. I will link everything below. Go check her out on Instagram. Also, come find me on Instagram. You can find me there at The Slow Living Collective, and you can find the website theslowlivingcollective.com. Thank you again so much for listening, and I will catch you in the next episode.